Welcome back to Corbin AI, where I'm showing you how to leverage artificial intelligence in your personal and your business life. This video is going to be a pretty cool one. I'm going to show you from start to finish how to create an automatic book generator, and this could be a book on any topic, whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, knowledge-based books, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it may be. I'm going to show you from start to finish how to create a book automatically using ChatGPT and Zapier. So that is why the background right here is Amazon books, as in theory, you could go the extra step here and start selling these books as well as a digital asset or as a physical asset. As you may already know, Amazon provides a great program when it comes to KDP. We're not going to be jumping into that part on this tutorial. I'm just going to show you how to actually create a book automatically based on minimal inputs that you provide. So let's go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to go over the softwares you need, but make sure to leave a like for the value you're about to see, as this type of content doesn't even exist yet. And what I'm about to show you essentially is going to give you a significant advantage in the coming years until, of course, we get to a point where this becomes common knowledge and essentially everyone produces a book in this matter. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's video. The major software you're going to need to have access to is going to be Zapier. Everything else showed here is going to be free to use. I will point out though, in this process, I'm going to use ChatGPT to kind of help me proctor some of the questions and some of the, input data that we use for the book. But you really don't need to use ChatGPT if you don't want to, because you can just basically, use your own knowledge and your own creativity to input the values that you'll see in today's tutorial. But let's go ahead and jump in here. We're going to start off with ChatGPT. I'm going to show you this from start to finish here. And essentially what we're going to build is this. We're going to build a Google form that requires some limited amount of input about the book you want to create. Once we provide the input of the limited amount of data on the book we want to create, essentially everything else will be automatic, and we will set up the entire flow together so you can see how to do that. So let's go ahead and start off this way though. Let's go ahead and see what major elements should be found when creating a book. And obviously you can go ahead and change your form more, tailored to whatever specific genre you're creating or whatever specific topic you want to create. So let's go ahead and say that the type of book or the type of automation we want to create is going to be for fantasy specific books. Obviously, whatever your form is going to be based off your genre, you would ask more questions that are aligned with the topics that are important to you. So since the automation we're creating today is going to be fantasy, you can obviously change the theme for this automation, as you'll see the major blueprint of this automation, to whatever genre that you care about. We're going to go ahead and start off by saying we are creating a book for the genre ask before writing. So I'm going to use GPT in this context to help me basically tell me the most optimal questions to ask in that Google form. So when we build out the automation, we have, we're very specific on what we need in order to create the most effective fantasy book. And there you go. Honestly, this is a one and done. That prompt was actually good enough for me to get the sufficient amount of data that is required for my needs. Essentially, what we're going to do here is we're going to take every single one of these questions and we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick and choose. We're not going to take every single one and we're going to go ahead and input that into a Google form and then provide it with some data. I'm going to go ahead and narrow this down a little bit. We're going to say, okay, based on the specific questions you asked for each category, choose answer is aligned with all the other answers, as this will be an example book. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm just basically asking ChatGPT, choose a setting for me. Choose the societies and cultures that inhabit the world. What I would do in your context, if you want to do this perfectly, is that every single question that it's suggesting for you to ask, you're going to input it to that form. But due to time limitations and how complex it's going to get, I'm just going to show you how to simply do it with some limited amount of questions based off the fantasy topic. And then once you see how to do the automation side, you can go ahead and proceed that way. But I would encourage you, if you genuinely want to make a book completely automatic, have every single one of these questions in the Google form, as it's going to provide you the most amount of data for you to create a book the most effective way. And on top of that, here's what's so great. Essentially, all you have to do once you build out the automation is just answer these questions again with a different, with a different answer, and it'll create a whole nother book automatically. So from here, as you see here, it chose basically 2 questions from each one of these topics and gave us a example answer. So let's go ahead and jump over to Google Forms and let's create it. So over here in Google Forms, I'm going to say new blank form here. We're going to call it book generator. And because of the fact that essentially This is just going to be for internal use. I don't necessarily need a lot of this information, such as like, I don't need the email associated with it. So let's go ahead and change a little bit of this information. I'm gonna go ahead and say, do not collect the email address. It's not necessary. And then this is where we're gonna go ahead and start putting the questions here. I'm gonna make this side by side, so this is a little bit easier for me. All right, so now that we have this side by side, essentially a lot of these are, actually majority, all of these are gonna be paragraph oriented questions. And as I said before, you would add every single one if you're gonna do this, as complex as possible. For us, we're gonna make it very simple. So we're gonna say, what setting is your fantasy world? And then we're just gonna put in that question. And then essentially, we're not gonna answer it yet, but we're gonna go ahead and just, ask the questions first. So what setting is your fantasy world? What rules of magic and supernatural elements? All right, copy that over. So this is assuming that every type of fantasy book you create has these elements, right? If they don't, then you'd obviously change that depending on whatever it is. What are the main characters and their motivations? We'll keep that. Come down to your plot development. What is the central conflict that they want to resolve? Okay, copy and paste this over here. And then we're gonna come over here. What theme do you want to explore in your fantasy book? And then we're going to grab that, paste that. And then we're gonna come over here and says, who is your target audience and what do you want readers to take away from the book? So you can either choose this or you can choose this. Let's go ahead and do this. What do you want readers to take away from your book? Let's do that. And okay, so we got our questions that are going to be associated with the book we're creating here. I'm going to go ahead and make this enlarge again. Actually, I don't need to make this enlarge. What I can do here essentially is that now that we've created this, come back out here and you'll see it's right here. And then let's go ahead and change it. So it's not going to untitled form. Let's change it to book generator. Okay, automatically did that for me. Let's go ahead and hit send and let's fill out this form. So I'm just going to go to the link here. I'm just going to paste it into a new URL. All right, so the reason we are filling this form out is because what you'll see with this automation is that we need sample data to play around with in order for us to build it out effectively. But on top of that, now you know the process of essentially creating a whole new book is going to be filling out a form like this and just hitting submit, and then everything else will incur. So this will make more sense, but for now, we're going to go ahead and just answer these questions. So we're going to say, what is the central conflict or problem the characters must resolve? That is not a question we had. So let me come back up here. Okay, we say, what is the setting of the fantasy world? We're going to say, paste this. What is the rules of magic and supernatural elements? We're going to paste this. Who are the main characters and what are the motivation? All right, we're going to paste this. And this is what I meant by you don't necessarily need ChatGPT, but I'm going to use ChatGPT because I don't want to sit down and be creative for an hour just to come up with all this. What is the central conflict? Okay, paste this. And then we're going to say, what themes do you want to explore in the fantasy book? Paste this over here. Whatever is relevant to your book. And honestly, as a book writer, you will know what is important based off your experience, what kind of questions should be asked in this context. But for now, we're going to go ahead and paste all this and we're going to submit this. And then we're going to use this as the data to create our automation. Okay, so coming over to Zapier. Zapier is an automation platform. If you are familiar with the channel, then you are well aware of Zapier. We do a ton of tutorials when it comes to Zapier. We do tutorials in different contexts when it comes to AI, such as automatically responding to emails, creating content with AI, stuff of this nature. But let's go ahead and create a Zapier. So a Zapier is going to allow us to essentially do this entire process automatically, which is going to be great. So we're going to create a Zapier. We're going to have we're going to have a trigger. What's going to start the Zap be a Google form submission. So we're going to do Google Forms. And then we're going to do an event of new form response. We're going to hit continue here. And then we're going to choose our account. For us, this is going to be our courses account here. We're going to hit continue here. And then we're going to go to choose our form. So it should be called book generator. Perfect. We're going to continue here. Let's go ahead and test this trigger. And we should grab all the relevant data that we cared about from this. And there you go. So here is all the relevant responses we got from that form, which is great. What we can do now is we can start making this book. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to do a ChatGPT block here. And ChatGPT is going to be the main block we use in this flow. You're going to see a lot of ChatGPT. You're going to see some formatting. You're going to see a bunch of different stuff. But let's start with a ChatGPT block here. And let's just start with something very simple here. So we're going to go ahead and just do conversation. We're going to continue here. We're going to continue here. And let's go ahead and see real quickly how they give us the responses. Okay, they do give us the question. So we will know basically the associated question with the response, which is nice. But just for the sake of debugging, I'm going to go ahead and have it open here as well so I can kind of reference this and what's important to me essentially. So essentially the way we kind of structured this already is like we had very broad and then we got to very niche questions near the end of this form. And as you see here, we got a bunch of different information in regards to this form. So what I'm going to do is this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table of contents. So this is going to be essentially how we're going to structure this entire book. So what's the best way to create a table of contents? Because of the fact we're dealing with a lot of data here, we're going to go ahead and use a model GPT 16K. This allows us for a lot of data input, a lot of data outputs. So let's go and start here. We're going to say we're going to say context. We are making a fantasy book. So whatever context your book is, you would change that. We are making a fantasy book, and here is the relevant information about this book. Do semicolon, and then essentially we can go ahead and kind of structure it maybe by Q question or information about book. So what I like to do sometimes, or most of the times, is essentially when you reference data points in the context, we're going to go ahead and use that reference point as the data point that we basically talk about what's the information about the book. This allows ChatGPT to understand it better and more reliable output. So as you see here, essentially we got a bunch of answers here. So for example, we got what are the rules of magic and supernatural. Now, when ChatGPT internalizes this information, it's not going to get the question with it. It's only going to get the text or the actual response. So in order to ensure that the ChatGPT can have a full comprehension of what's occurring here, we're going to go ahead and copy and paste the questions over. So we're going to go ahead and do what is the setting of the fantasy world? And then let's go ahead and just paste them over. So one by one. So now we have these one by one. I'm going to hit a semicolon after every single one here, so it understands that essentially what the data that is preceding it is going to be the relevant data that we care about. So what is the setting of your fantasy world? We're going to come over and find that question. What is the setting? Okay, perfect. Make sure we hit enter here. And then we're going to say, what are the rules of magic and supernatural? We're going to go ahead and just associate every single one of these questions with the associated answer. What is the central conflict or problem? There we go. What themes do your, okay, there we go. And then what do you want the readers to take away from the book? Now, as I said before, the amount of questions you ask is going to be more correlated to how complex you want the book, how well thought of you want the book. But a lot of the times, ChatGPT can really, you give it a little bit and it takes a mile. So it really knows how to, extrapolate data. So we're going to say generate a table of contents of this book based on its information we provided. We want it chapter style. And then let's go ahead and get this output out. So table of contents. And then I might need to restructure a little bit of this, but let's first see if this comes out how we want it to come out. So we're going to say GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K. Essentially, the point of having that 16K on there allows us to handle more text, so there's less occurrence of an error. We're going to go ahead and say book table. Memory key ensures consistent output. So if we get an output we like, this locks it in for us. We're going to continue here. We're going to test this up, and memory key can be a random string of 32 characters. And there we go. We got a nice little table of contents here. As you see, we got table of contents, and then we got chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and an epilogue. We could actually go a little further here. In theory, I could, add a formatter block that says here, we want a max of 8 chapters. We want a max of 5 chapters. We want a max of 12 chapters. So let's actually add that so we can have even further consistency on the type of book. So we're going to say format, max chapters will be 5. Max chapters will be 5. Let's go ahead and see if this works. I may need to restructure this and choose however many chapters you want and essentially kind of proceed from here. Now, if you do too many chapters, you may need to do 2 of these blocks in order to handle that much data, but this should be sufficient. Okay, so as you see here, it didn't actually listen to the output, which is fine. What we can do here is going to say generate a table of contents of this book based on, we want it chapter style. We want 5 chapters, and I didn't even spell chapters correctly, generated. So sometimes maybe you have to restructure your prompt a little, add it into the actual underlying prompt here. I'm gonna add a 1 here to clear the memory key here, so it doesn't base off its output based off past outputs. So let's get a clean slate here and see what it comes up with. And there you go. So we got our table of contents. We got chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and an epilogue. And as you'll notice here, it even gives a structuring of what's occurring in the chapter here, which is going to be very valuable to us. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to go ahead and just rename this to structure of book. And we're going to go ahead and do our first step here. So our first step here is we're going to extract some data from this underlying output. And the data we're going to extract is going to be just the chapter titles, because of the fact that essentially this output, as you'll see here, is going to be one big data block, which means that we can't grab certain points of this data and look at. So essentially I come down here, and if I wanted to use this data later on in the flow, it's going to be the entire block here, which is not good, right? So what we want to do here is actually not a ChatGPT block. We're going to use a different type of block here in order to ensure consistent outputs. We're going to use a block called formatter. And formatter essentially is going to allow us to structure the data that's occurring here. So we're going to say text. We're going to choose the event of what we want to transform here. We're going to say split, and we're going to say split text. Split text is going to allow us to split up these data points here. We're going to go ahead and hit reply. If I can go ahead and grab that. So reply is always going to be associated with your ChatGPT output. If it's going to let me go. Okay, got it. And then we're going to do a parameter of new line. And you might be saying, how the heck do you know to spell it like that? Essentially, you can come over here, and this is their documentation of like how to identify the way you want to structure it. From here, though, we're going to do a segment index. We're going to say all as separate fields. This is going to allow us to grab specific data points. As you see, we're going to want the chapter 2, chapter 3, and as you see, we did it perfectly. So from this, we went ahead and got all of our different chapters as different data points. So now we can grab them as you would like. So this is going to come useful later on in this tutorial. For now, we're going to go ahead and leave that here. We'll go ahead and rename this to split table data or table of contents. And we can go ahead and proceed from here. So I'm going to go ahead and click there, and let's go ahead and create the logic for each chapter. So this is going to be very, very specific to your underlying use case. I'm going to go ahead and change this to book generator, and I think I should be able to share this at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the Zapier in the description down below so you can add it directly into your project for completely free. So make sure to leave a like, helps me out here. And then I'm going to go ahead and do an event of conversation here. So we're going to say continue, and we're going to say, we can go ahead and use some of the logic here. So we're going to say context, go like that. I'm going to grab this real quick. So context, we are making a fantasy book. Here is the relevant information about the book. We're going to say we are making a fantasy book. Here is chapter 1 and its relevant context. Do semicolon here. We're going to say chapter 1, parentheses, and we're going to go ahead and provide this information that we got here. So we're going to come down here and find chapter 1. Here we go. And you might be saying to yourself, well, what if it generates and it doesn't follow exactly to the split the context? Don't worry. That's the whole point of the memory key. It basically implies that it's going to be consistently outputted that way every single time. So you don't have to worry about that. We're going to go ahead and add the context here. And as we know, the context is going to be the 3 data points or bullet points that were associated with the underlying output here. And in order to find it, essentially all we need to do is go to chapter 1 here and see how it's line item 3. We can go ahead and find line item 4. So let me go ahead and make this simple on myself. So 4, and then we do line item 5. Not a spotlight search. Hello. Line item 5. Okay, come down here, and we should find that real quick. Here we go. And then line item 6. So that's going to be the associated following lines in that specific data point here. And we can go ahead and just add a return statement here. And based off this, this is where the magic happens. So we're going to say context. We're making a fantasy book. Here is chapter 1 and its relevant context. We're going to say generate an entire chapter based on this. And then here's the thing. We're going to have to add some formatting here. So we're going to say formatter output max of, let's say 500 words for now. So I'm going to try 2 things here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use a 16K block, see what the style is. And then I'm going to use a GPT-4 block and see what the style is then. In theory, we are going to want to optimally use a ChatGPT-4 block as the underlying output will be more comprehensive to an underlying reader. So it'll be better to read essentially, right? Because GPT-4 is a more comprehensive model. Let me make sure I test this step. Okay, so as you see from that context, we were able to get around 500 words here, but let's take it one step further here. Let's go ahead and say we wanted to use GPT-4 as, to be honest with you, if you're going to genuinely sell this book, you're probably more inclined to use GPT-4 because of the fact that the outputs and the actual readability is going to be higher quality. So I'm going to go ahead and test this step again, and let's see what the new output is, and I'm going to show you a little trick in order to extend the version of an underlying chapter here. Okay, so as you see here, pretty good stuff here, and then as you'll notice, the output does cut off here, but don't worry, we can go ahead and structure this. So we're going to go ahead and do, we'll just name it chapter 1. And then we're going to go ahead and do a duplication here. So I'm going to duplicate this block. I'm going to say chapter 1 extension. So essentially what I'm about to show you here, you can use in other context in the sense of you could really extend the chapter if you wanted to. So what I like to do in this context, because of the fact that GPT-4 can only handle so much input data, plus the more input data that you provide in ChatGPT encompasses larger cost, what we can do here is a couple things. So I'm going to first try our first method here, where essentially I take this data and let GPT-4 finish it for me. And if it works successfully, we can kind of proceed like that. So I'm going to hit action here. I'm going to say context for Making a Fantasy Book. Here is chapter 1. Here is the start of chapter 1, and then do semicolon, and then we're going to go ahead and put in, so we can reaffirm that start of chapter 1. And we're going to go ahead and put the previous output here. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and say generate the rest of this chapter. Now, in theory, I could say generate part 2 of the chapter, generate part 3 of the chapter. It's stuff of this nature, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to say generate the rest of this chapter based on this output max 500. I could change that, and I'm going to keep it how it is. I'm going to hit 2 here, clean the slate. Let's say continue here, and then let's retest this step. So in theory, we left off at the fracture in the, and then it should kind of continue that logic. So let's see. Okay, so we got our output here. Let's see if the logic consists here. We say, thus a unique journey began, born from the unsettling discovery. Arya, the guardian of Eldora, rose to face her destiny, a quest to reclaim harmony, to bridge the fracture that threatens to dismantle Eldoria. The fracture in the Arya rose from the plateau, her heart pounding. She ran her fingers through her auburn hair, calling upon the earth to resonate with her. At first, I was like, that doesn't make sense. But then I realized I missed this part. Okay, so it says, the fracture in the kingdom was growing, threatening to sunder the land and cause catastrophe on an apocalyptic scale. Obviously, you can change the tone. You can change how you dictate it. We can even go as far as mimicking different authors here. I could go as far as saying, make this sound like J.K. Rowling if I wanted to. There's a lot of complex stuff we can go from here. But as you see, we completed this chapter, and we can go ahead and proceed from here, and you can go and structure this how you want. And what we can do essentially is, from this data point, we would essentially repeat this process of splitting, of essentially grabbing the chapter's underlying information, outputting it for the first version, for the first part of the chapter, second part of the chapter, third part of the chapter, stuff of this nature. Now, if you really want to get complex with this, you could take this one step further here, and you could use this information found here as kind of a overall arching summary point of the knowledge it should continue from here. So what I mean by that is, let me go ahead and duplicate this and show you what I mean by that. So if you really want to make long chapters, and we're talking like pages on pages on pages, a lot of content in one chapter, the best way to go about that is keep context of chapter at the top of your output. So essentially, we're going to say context of chapter. Let's say context of chapter. We are making a Facebook. Here is chapter 1. Let's say chapter 1, part 3. So let's say in theory that this is part 1, part 2, and we use this kind of knowledge. So we're going to do part 1, part 2, part 3, and essentially on top of the output here, we're going to go ahead and provide this. So what this does here is that this gives us a broad idea of the context that's associated with that chapter, which means that it is consistent on its output for whenever you future, Google form submissions and stuff of this nature. And essentially we can say generate, the third part of this chapter, right? And then what I meant by tone, I said you could tone, mimic this author writing style, boom, stuff like this. I mean, you can really get complex with this. But for now, let's go ahead and show you how you can push this automatically so the data pushes towards a Google Doc. So we're going to do Google Doc here. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and hit Google Docs. And we're going to say choose an event here. We're going to say create document from text. We're going to continue here. We're going to choose our account, which is going to be our courses account here. And we're going to hit continue here as well. And we're going to go ahead and choose our document name. So our document name We can kind of grab from this if we wanted to. Let's just say, let's just take it one step further, shall we? We're going to say, based off this information, essentially come up with a title. To do so, I'm going to go ahead and create a ChatGPT block here. And we're going to go ahead and do an event of conversations. We're going to do conversation here. And we're going to continue here. We're going to say, based off this fantasy book information or content, we'll say that, semicolon, and then we're going to go ahead and provide the reply here. Generate a book title. This might be pretty simple here. I think this should be able to handle essentially what I'm trying to do here. I might need to proctor this prompt a little bit more. And as you'll notice, and as you work through using ChatGPT and proctoring it in Zapier, you're going to have to sometimes come back to prompts and readjust them, look for a better output, stuff of this nature. Come down here, we got harmony of elements, Arya's quest to Eldora. I like it. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to book title. And then as you'll notice here, it has quotation marks, which isn't honestly a killer. But if you wanted to take the extra step here and really make it automatic, what we can do is we can add a formatter block here. We're going to add text here. And essentially, we're just going to remove the quotation marks. So I'm going to do an event of replace. So essentially what we'll do is we'll grab the input of this output. So reply here. We're going to look for the quotation marks here. And we're just going to replace it with empty space so that we just get purely harmony of the elements, Arya's quest to Eldora. Come down here. We can go ahead and rename this document to the formatted version of the text. And then we can go ahead and put the document content here. So we can do a couple things. In theory, I could go out of my way in order to perfectly structure this and give the formatted version of the table of contents. What I'm going to do for my purpose is I'm just going to give the entire output of this original one here. And this can handle HTML, so I'm add some breaks here. That also means that in your outputs, you could have them in HTML as well. So keep that in mind for the formatter side, max of 500 words and output in HTML. Although that really depends on the context of your book. Some books are just, you don't add bold or italicized stuff. From here though, we're going to go ahead and do chapter 1. What we'll do for it to make it look good though is we'll add essentially chapter 1 at the very top. So I'm going to go ahead and do chapter 1 here. And in order for me to really see chapter 1, I'm going to add some bold action here. So I'm going to do B here. And the BRs is break, so that's going to basically give me some spacing. If I can click on this other side, let me see. Okay, so just so this works, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And then let's go and put chapter 1 in here. There we go. All right, we're going to enter again. And essentially let's input the output here. So we're going to go ahead and do reply here. And essentially do the extension of that reply here. And let's go ahead and create this document. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. We're going to choose our folder. For us, I'm going to go ahead and choose API request that we have here, or let's do YouTube Zaps. And we're going to continue, and then we're going to test this step. So this should automatically create this into a Google Doc document. And there we go. From that, we got our table of contents. I did realize that essentially it already gave us chapter 1, but that shows you how to basically bold it if you wanted to. Chapter 1 there. An entire book or entire chapter AI generated with its relevant context here, which means that this can get pretty complex here. Essentially, you can repeat the formatting and the formula that I just gave you here for all the relevant titles and all the relevant chapters that you want for that specific book. Now, just to give some context here, this can get really complex. I've done flows like this that get up to 70 to 80 blocks in Zapier to really build out an entire flow here. Now, keep in mind, so you're limited, I believe, around 100 blocks in Zapier, so there is a max here. But in theory, you could set up a flow where essentially once you get maybe half the book written here, you could have it basically pass the data from that first half to the second Zapier to build out the second half of the flow. I mean, this can get really complex here, but what I can tell you from truth and from my experience on this industry and automation and AI in general is essentially by you just putting in the relevant input data here, you can generate an entire book within probably 3 minutes based off all this information, because here is what's so fundamental about what we just did here. Essentially what we did here is every single one of these blocks isn't dealing with fixed text, is dealing with live data, which means that every single one of these blocks is going to be a variable-oriented output. These questions, these inputs for these questions change, everything else in this flow changes, but what's so key is how we structure it and how we deal with that data. So essentially, when we come to this block for chapter 1, this is going to be different because we gave different inputs on that form, but it's still going to be structured like this. So this is pretty crazy. We can do a ton of stuff when it comes to this, but essentially, this is the keys to generating AI automated books and really making some, full-blown AI generated books on complex topics based off a limited amount of input on a form. So if you felt like you found value today, make sure to leave a like. It's completely free and it helps us here at Corbin AI. If you want to learn more about automation, and more specifically automation when it comes to artificial intelligence, I'm going to leave a playlist at the end of this video where essentially I'm diving into all the apps found on this automation platform, and I'm showing you how to leverage AI with every single one. I encourage you to check it out because at the end of the day, AI is coming, and essentially if you learn how to leverage it, you're going to be able to save a bunch of time, and it's going to give you a huge competitive edge. But without further ado, I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for tuning in. And yes, surprise, I'm an AI avatar. Make sure to explore more here at Corbin AI, where we demystify AI for your personal and business life. Until next time.